Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Dylan Tovitz. One of the biggest weeks for Vanderbilt football in recent memory, and maybe the biggest week in recent memory for Vanderbilt football. You see, yesterday Vanderbilt's named 16th in the AP poll, and the big news, Dylan, Vanderbilt gets College Game Day to go to Alabama. I think say what you want about the slate. Obviously, not the strongest slate of the year. Certainly not as strong as this weekend's, but like I wrote this weekend, Vanderbilt earned College Game Day, and I think people are going to try to take it away from them, particularly if the result doesn't go their way on Saturday. But man, they earned it. Dylan, your initial reaction to Vanderbilt being in that spot and kind of what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, in a vacuum, college game day doesn't mean that much. But when you look a little deeper, it does, I think, represent the shift that we've seen, um, really go on in this program. And I think, like if you talk to someone before the season, like a Vanderbilt fan, like full of biases, and like they would have told you their highest like hopes could be we're going to Alabama 5-0. We're getting college game day either at Bama or back again for LSU. And I mean, that's what's happened. And to your point, Joey, I mean, the team does deserve this. And, it's not going to affect their game day experience that much, but just the national attention that was already going to be on the spotlight of this game is now going to be that much bigger. And it's also rewarding for Vanderbilt fans. Obviously, game day coming isn't coming to Nashville, but just to see the team, which is a really, really fun team, like we've talked about. And I mean, I would guess that they've been trying to come to Vanderbilt, trying to at least see a Vanderbilt game um, for a few months now and dating back to last season. So I think it's a really cool thing for the program. And it definitely represents, another step where it's like if you looked at this a few years ago and someone had said, Vanderbilt, or even just 2 years ago, or even last year before, the Bama win, someone had said Vanderbilt's going to be featured on College Game Day in less than a year. Like that's crazy. Like, they would have called you crazy and laughed in your face. So I think that again, this is just another sign of how far the program has come and the shift that's ongoing. And of course, that doesn't mean they're going to be happy with this. Like I'm sure they looked at it, and Clark Lee is not going to want to hear the word college game day once in that locker room this week. And he made that very, very clear in the post game presser when talking about how they prepared for last week's game. He didn't want to hear the word Alabama once. So they're keeping that mentality. But in terms of like the program and the fans and the Nashville community and the team itself, it's a pretty cool thing, I'd say.
Sure. Dylan, I look at it and first of all, I think it's a great story for College Game Day as hell, not only because of what happened last year, and at this point we all know what happened last year in this matchup. I think first of all, Diego Pavia is a great story. Clark Lee is a great story of kind of beating the odds and doing something that nobody thought he could do. You look at Brian Longwell, a guy who was told no by Auburn on Christmas morning. There's a lot of things that the College Game Day can gravitate towards with this program, and I think it's a big deal that this program is having its story told in that way. I think that's something to note in itself that more people are going to hear about this program and what they're doing, and then once Saturday hits, they're not going to be able to really avoid what Vanderbilt is doing and the result of that game. I think everybody has to pay attention to Vanderbilt football on Saturday, and the relevance is a big deal to me just because this program for so long has been irrelevant, and you could go a whole season if you weren't paying attention without seeing a Vanderbilt football score. Saturday, I think all of America is at least going to know what happened in that game, even if they don't watch it. It's on ABC. College Game Day's there. It's a top 20 matchup. Maybe could have been a top 15 matchup if something went Vanderbilt's way in the AP poll. I mean, that's a big deal in itself, Dylan. And I think it's even bigger when I look at last year. And we had some talk about College Game Day, and I think the Texas game was the one that people had kind of pinpointed. Vanderbilt maybe laid an egg a little bit against Ball State and didn't get it. And it wasn't only because of that, it was because of the slate that week as well. But Dylan, I don't think Vanderbilt was really ready for College Game Day last year. I don't think they were a good enough team to get it. They were 7-6, and I don't know. I just think there was a lot to be desired there. There were still some things left in their build. I think this, I think they were always circled on College Game Day's radar ever since they probably beat South Carolina this year, if I had to guess. I mean, I think they're ready for this now, whereas a year ago, it's not as if that would have affected any result they had. I just don't know that they were a good enough team last year. They were a great story and something that College Game Day could have gravitated towards, but I mean, they're a much better team this year than they were last year. They have a much better resume than they did at this point last year, and I think they're certainly ready for it now more than they've ever been in the past, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point there, I think Vanderbilt, you mentioned like they have a team full of really good fun storylines to tell, and we've been telling it, but the national media hasn't. He's first starting to kind of dip their toe in the water in Vanderbilt, and I think Game Day is a good example of that. But to your point, like they didn't just get Game Day because they have this crazy story with Diego Pavia and Stowers and Tim Beck and Clark Lee and turning the program around. Like they got it because they're one of the better teams in the country right now, and like they earned that, like strictly storylines aside, and Nashville aside, and the vibes and the rematch and the Bama situation aside, like to your point, like they earned this like very clearly with their play. And I mean they're 5-0. If they go and beat Alabama, they're going to be the first and I believe only SEC team bowl eligible like so far through 6 seasons, or 6 seasons, 6 weeks. Like that is great. That says a lot. Like this is a team that their aspirations are still really high, and they're on track to make those things happen. I was scrolling through like odds last night, and I think we talk about like Vegas odds a lot, and by we I mean like in general the media in terms of things, and it doesn't you can't like use that as an end all be all, but it is interesting, and I think there are I saw like I mentioned Pavia's odds are down to I believe 17-1 to win the Heisman, which is actually probably should be a little bit higher because there's no clear front runner at all. So
What it started at 35, is that right?
150 to
Oh
1.
my gosh, way up. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
wow. That
Plus
I mean that's a
close to
huge jump.
15,000. I mean, it is, and it makes sense. But my point was like, there's no one very really that's a clear front runner after John Mateer's injury and then Florida State's loss with Tommy Castellanos. So, like right now, I think Ty Simpson from Bama is the front runner in the race, like by the odds. And I would if Vanderbilt goes into Bama and beats Alabama this week, and Pavi is a good game, like it's not crazy to say that a week from now he could be the Heisman frontrunner. Like that's
Mhm.
crazy. It sounds crazy, but it's true. I mean, if he plays a good game, like there's no one that the odds are still 70-1, and the leader is 9-1, I think. So he could very easily jump that. And then in terms of Vanderbilt in general, I think I saw their odds to make the college football playoff are 5-1, I believe, right now, which is still like a decently like long shot, but it's not the 100, 200-1 that like we always see when we look at those odds. And again, odds don't mean all that much, and I know we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves here. Obviously, they have to go win games. Pavia has to keep playing really well to keep his name in those conversations, and they really only have a shot to make the playoff and do the things they want to do. If they lose two, maybe three games, but like probably two, depending on who they lose and the rest of their wins. But I mean, everything is, as we've mentioned, and as Clark Lee has mentioned, everything is really laid out in front of them for where they want to go going forward.
Sure. Dylan, I think I'll segue us here into more Alabama specific stuff. I wrote this morning this Vanderbilt team could learn a thing or two from one, Stephen Hubbard, and two, CJ Taylor. First of all, CJ Taylor declared last year that they were going to beat Alabama, and I think people thought they were an idiot. People thought I was clout chasing for reporting that CJ Taylor had said that. So uh, I'll take my victory lap there. I wasn't. I was just putting out a quote. And then two, Stephen Hubbard, as Diego Pavia said, if it ain't about beating Bama, then get the f out the way. Stephen Hubbard was not trying to talk to you. I think that's the mentality this Vanderbilt team needs to have. There's so much surrounding this game, even more so than this time last year. If Vanderbilt's able to drown that out, I would guess it's much better off this week rather than being absorbed by College Game Day and ABC. And I'm sure there'll be people at practice more so than there have been in the past. But this Vanderbilt team has to stay on the mission, stay on task. And I think if it does that, I don't know that it's going to be favored or anywhere near it. It's a double-digit underdog at this point, but you would have to think it'd be competitive in this game if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean everything we've seen from them so far, and them, I mean Vanderbilt would tell you this game is going to be close. I think they haven't played really a close game yet. I think they've won every game by 20 points or more. Um, that's not going to happen against Alabama, even if they play their very best game. This game is going to, come down to the wire, kind of like it did last year. But they do have, when they beat Alabama last year, it was because every single thing went their way, and
Mm,
they Bama was not prepared for the Tim Beck offense, and they hit the 4th and 1 to Junior Sherrill, and you know they had the tipped pass interception to Fontenette, and like a bunch of other kind of things that just went the right way, and they still are not going to run away with this game no matter what. But Vanderbilt, I think they no longer need that. Like they can
mhm.
go out there and play their brand of football, and the game should be close. And they need to play a good game, of course, to keep it close. They could easily get blown out if they don't, but they don't. They no longer need like miracles upon miracles upon like lucky chances that go their right way. Like they believe that this season, and I think they've given us every reason to believe that as well. That um, if they play a good football game, they can absolutely go out there and win. And I'm sure we can get into specific matchups, but Alabama is really tough, up front as they always are, and the
Mhm.
offensive line is going to have to hold their own, and the defensive line, I think was a massive factor last year. Miles Capers had a really big game against the Crimson Tide last year. He'll have to do that again, and the secondary as well definitely raises some questions. Obviously, it was a bit of an issue last year against Alabama. I think Ryan Williams had a crazy game, and you
Mhm.
know, um, but it's a really good Alabama football team, and they're playing really well right now after their week 1 loss. They, obviously double-digit victory against Georgia at Georgia this past weekend. Which is funny because it's exactly what happened last year before
Mhm.
they played. But they're playing really good football, and they're not. They're going to take Vanderbilt seriously. They've seen what Vanderbilt's doing. Even the fact that they got College Game Day means like should probably tell them like if nothing else is going to tell them that like I think this would tell
Mhm.
them like hey, this is no longer the joke matchup that like we've thought it has been for the past 20 years, and we learned that last year, but like we really are not going to let this happen again. So it's not going to be as easy as it was last year, but Vanderbilt is also much better, than they were last year. So it's going to be, I think, a really fun and exciting game.
Yeah, Dylan, it's a good point about last year. The stage was set with Alabama beating Georgia, and you're going into that game thinking there's no way that the team that just beat Georgia with the president in the stands and a sold out crowd and Ryan Williams doing his thing is going to lose to this Vanderbilt team. And that ended up happening. And it feels like, in a way, the stage is similar. I thought that was a really impressive win. I'm kind of Captain Obvious here, but I think that tells you a lot about that Alabama team where I think we had both kind of discussed that we thought they were better than people thought they were. Like, I don't think the Florida State game should have defined them as much as it did early. I don't think that meant that the Kalen DeBoer era was a complete disaster like a lot of people thought it was because of that. But I also think like this Alabama team has no excuse to lose to this Vanderbilt team now. Like you mentioned, like there's no possible way that you can overlook this Vanderbilt team at this point. They're 5-0. College Game Day's there. It's on ABC. Alabama lost to them last year, which by the way was probably the reason they didn't make the college football playoff. They've got to be ready to go, and I'm sure they will be. Ryan Williams said this summer what is it? What was it? The ant with the sledgehammer comment
Yeah.
that Diego Pavia kind of fired back at him with. I mean, this is going to be a game that I think Alabama has had circled on its calendar for a while. That says something about Vanderbilt and the way it's built this thing and the impression it made. Dylan, it also says Vanderbilt's got to play one of its better games because there's going to be no lapses in focus from Alabama this weekend. This is going to be Vanderbilt getting Alabama's best, like it did a few years ago when Bryce Young and was it Jalen Waddle beat it 55-3. It's certainly a different feel, but I mean, you're going to get Alabama's best, and I think that's a scary thing for a lot of teams. Vanderbilt's obviously not going to back down from it. That wouldn't be true to character, but there's no plausible way where that Alabama's going to look at past again.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, and they're gonna have to, not really make mistakes. And I know I said they don't have to play a flawless game, maybe like they did last year, but they got to play pretty close to it if they
Mhm.
want to win this game still. And I think what that looks like is, you know, just really, really, being precise and being intentional about every play. and avoiding those mistakes. And that's not just the turnovers because they know they can't afford to turn the ball over, and they need to win the turnover battle, which is how they won last year with the Caper strip sack and the Fontaine pick six. And they realize that. It's also about hitting on your chances. I think there's been a lot of plays so far that haven't really mattered, but that they've left out on the field, specifically on offense. Again, it hasn't mattered because they've been able to just pretty much do whatever they want through 5 games on offense. And like, who cares if they get in 3rd and 12 because they're just going to convert it. It's kind of been what's happened so far this season.
Right.
That can't happen on Saturday against Alabama. There's been some deep balls that I think Pavia's had open, and either the receiver ran the wrong route or Pavia overthrew him by 3 steps. And it's just like those are plays that they need to hit on. Oh, we're about to have company again. Um, those are plays that they need to, how's it going? Those are plays that they need to hit on though. Against Alabama. And I think there was a play maybe I want to say Caleb Barnett on Saturday where maybe it was Trey Richardson. I think it was Trey Richardson. It was a deep ball, and like Pavi actually had Richardson, but then it looked like Richardson like looked up like he was expecting a safety and then lost the ball and then was overthrown
Mhm.
by a step. And it's like, I'm talking about the deep balls specifically, but really across the board, I think that they need to hit on those plays and really not leave plays out on the field if they want to go win.
Yeah, Dylan, there's a good question in the presser on Saturday. I forget who it was from, but it was about penalties, and Clark Lea just will not stop talking about penalties in these post games. But it hasn't mattered for them to this point. To your point, it's going to matter this weekend, and it's going to be difficult to kind of overcome that crowd. Which I'm interested to see how lively it is for Vanderbilt. I assume pretty lively, especially coming off the Georgia game with game day there and everything. But Dylan, I think the penalties are a huge deal. And say what you will about the refs, at some point Vanderbilt has to be better with penalties and things along those lines. It's gotta be sharper. It's got to be more precise. And if it is, then it's given itself a chance. But Dylan, we've talked about how the blueprint has kind of changed for Vanderbilt this year, where they're hitting on more explosives, they're forcing more turnovers, they're getting stops on 3rd down, things along those lines. And it's made the margins a little bit less important. It did against South Carolina and Virginia Tech, and they were able to win those games by a lot, despite penalties, despite maybe some turnovers and maybe being down early. That stuff can't happen this weekend. Bama's too good to do that against. Like you said, it's got to be close to a flawless game, not quite flawless, but if you're going to win, it's got to be because the penalties aren't showing up. You got to hit on more explosives, and it's not that they haven't, but you can't leave them out on the table. And I also think like you can't give up the backbreaking 3rd down, or you yourself can't get to 3rd and 12. It's got to be a lot more about what it was last year when they won these big games than it has been this year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. And you bring up a good point. The penalties, I kind of put that in that category. But there was a lot of, I would say, undisciplinedness. I might have just made up that word, but I think it's a word.
Close
Um,
enough.
on Saturday, and I think that's part of the reason why Utah State was able to put up 35 points, especially in the first half. There was like the sequence with the penalties and the false start, and then obviously the two calls on the punts that shouldn't have happened, and but like maybe that was, not great officiating by the refs. And I think Clark Lee expressed that in the most Clark Lee way possible, which was like, I have a ton of respect for the refs and everything they do. And then like saying maybe he didn't agree with those calls. And Marlon Sewell clearly didn't agree with the blocked punt. And I think
Yeah.
most Vanderbilt fans agree that he got a finger on that as well. But it's besides the point. Like, you can't leave those plays up to, decision by the refs. And if they do those kind of things against Alabama, they're gonna, run into some serious issues. And I think the other aspect here, to your second point about staying out of those 3rd and longs, like Vanderbilt has the capability to win this game in like a shootout, of explosive plays and whatever. I don't think that's how they want to win this game, and I don't think that's their best route to
Mhm.
winning it. I think um, the almost resorting back to a little bit of what they did last year, which was moving the ball like slowly down the field, time of possession, like really staying ahead of the sticks and not getting into those passing situations, staying in 2nd and medium, 3rd and short. I think that's their best path to winning this game. You
Mhm.
don't necessarily want to keep going back and forth and possession for possession for possession because then the defense is going to tire out really quickly and it's going to be hard to really give any resistance, I think, to this Alabama offense. And then that makes it so if Pavia and the offense, they have to play pretty much perfect and they can't afford one turnover. They can't afford a, you know, holding penalty that backs them up. And if they get into that situation, I think it's a lot harder to win. And they've been able to succeed in those situations because of some of the preparation they've done and some of the plays they've had. I think they're 61% on third down this season, and that's a really high number. Especially considering like a lot of them have been taking those more explosive plays, so some of them are more third and medium, third and long. Um, and they're also 86% in the red zone in terms of touchdown conversion, and those are two like really high
Mhm.
numbers. And obviously, we've talked about it; they haven't played maybe the best defenses, but it's still really I think telling. But again, to win this game, they have to make it easy for themselves by, giving the defense time to rest, holding on to the football, staying ahead of the sticks, and then going from there, Joey.
Sure. Dylan, here's two things that I think make the margins really small in a game like this, and both of these kind of applied last year, as you mentioned, but I think Alabama might even be stronger in both these areas. First of all, their wide receiver room is just unbelievable. Ryan Williams, obviously the headliner, he honestly hasn't even had one of the better years in the receiver room, probably the second or third best year. Jeremy Bernard has had a really impressive start to the year. Isaiah Horton, another really impressive player that I think is going to be a tough cover for Vanderbilt. We've seen spotty results from Martel Height throughout a lot of the year, and it's not to say he's had a bad year, but obviously didn't grade out well in a few of their games. This is the game for Martel Height. It's the game for Colby Taylor. You want to go play in the NFL? Go do it this weekend. Go find a way to maybe not shut down Ryan Williams, but contain him or contain Isaiah Horton or Jeremy Bernard, something along those lines. I think that's a huge area of talent discrepancy still between these two teams if I look at it. And that's not to say that Vanderbilt can't slow those guys down, but I mean, those are three NFL players, and Vanderbilt is still trying to catch up in its cornerback recruiting. It's a good room, and we've talked about it, but it's almost drawing to think about what those guys are going to have to deal with on Saturday. And then, two, the line of scrimmage. Look at Alabama. I think a big key to that win over Georgia was pass protection. PFF graded it a 93. And obviously, when Bama's been at its best, it's been because of its ability to give Ty Simpson time to find those receivers. Defensively, got a lot of playmakers on the line of scrimmage, too. Tim Keenan's one of the better guys in the interior in the league. And man, Dylan, they've got a lot to account for on Saturday on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but I think their ability to slow down the big play through the air is going to be a huge, huge deal as well.
Yeah, I think that's massive, and I'm glad you brought up Martel Hyde and Colby Taylor because I do think, in terms of, I guess you could say X factor in terms of where this game could be won or lost. I do think it's the secondary and the cornerback room. You mentioned Hyde. I think he's, I would say the eye test has backed up the PFF so far that maybe he hasn't been as dominant, especially on the defensive side of the ball, as he was last year. Does it have something to do with his offense, his special teams, some kind of load management? Clark Lee said no. He said he's totally fine. He's a full go. But he's definitely, a more undersized cornerback, and he needs to make up for that with his, sticky coverage. And I think maybe we haven't seen the best of Martel Hyde on defense yet. And to your point, this is a great, opportunity to show that. And if they're getting beat consistently down the field, and by they I mean Hyde and Colby Taylor, I think you might see, some more Marlon Jones. You might see some more Mark Davis. Jalen Lackey played a lot against Alabama last year. Like, didn't have a great game, but honestly, like, played pretty strong defense against Ryan Williams. There was obviously the big touchdown that was on Lackey, but that wasn't like bad coverage. That was just Ryan Williams and Jalen Miller making a play. I Jordan Matthews too. Actually, he's worth mentioning because I thought he had a the forced fumble 2 weeks ago. Had a nice pass play break up on third down this past week. Hasn't been in the game that much, but I thought he's been making a difference as well. So they
Mhm.
do have options there at cornerback. But to your point, like if this becomes a rotating group of cornerbacks and none of them can really stop this big play down the field, and they're unable to then play the kind of defense they want to play, which is bringing CJ Hurd up in the box. having him go make tackles, blitzing your slot corner or Rendo every once in a while, Fontanet, and bringing those safeties down in the line of scrimmage to put some pressure on the quarterback. If their cornerbacks can't stick with these receivers, which is a really tall task, they're not going to be able to do that. They're going
Mhm.
to have to keep two safeties deep, which is going to then put a lot of pressure on the defensive line to get pressure on and get pressure on the quarterback with you know a really stout Alabama offensive line and not many free blitzers. So it's going to be interesting how the defense and Steve Gregory kind of schemes it and game plans it. Do they trust anyone to stick in one-on-one coverage on the field with Ryan Williams? Like I think that would probably be a mistake,
Mhm.
considering the lack of maybe top heavy talent in the cornerback room, at least so far. I think Martel Hyde maybe has it, but hasn't necessarily showcased it so far this season. Um, or do they just hope that their front four can make an impact and they leave two safeties deep? It's interesting. There's no really great solution to it. I think either way, you're giving up something you don't want to give up.
Mhm.
But definitely, it's a lot of pressure on that secondary and on that quarterback room because even if they're not leaving the cornerbacks in one-on-one coverage, if they're not, blitzing a ton, the Simpsons gonna have a lot more time in the pocket, and they're gonna need to stick with their defense for a lot longer as well.
Sure. Dylan, can you see me?
Yeah, you
All
flipped.
right.
Oh, now you're
I,
good.
good. I got a phone call. I need to turn on Do Not Disturb
You're good.
during this. But yeah, I think that's the interesting thing here. It's not only that they have so many playmakers. Ty Simpson's decision making this far has been surgical.
Good point.
I mean, he is not going to fall for a lot of these stunts and things along those lines that have tripped up other quarterbacks Vanderbilt has faced. I think this is the best pure test of Vanderbilt's defense that we've seen to this point. And obviously, they had a great showing against South Carolina, great showing against Virginia Tech. The numbers were unbelievable. Saturday, you saw it start to sputter a little bit against Utah State, where I think there were too many penalties, obviously, and that cost them a drive. Whether you think that's the refs or you think that's Vanderbilt's defense, we'll leave that up to you. But I mean, there were too many plays that didn't happen in the first 4 weeks that happened in week five. And I wonder how much of that is it's a day game. It's kind of a letdown spot a little bit versus is that Vanderbilt's defense regressing to the mean? I'm not sure. That's something we're going to find out on Saturday. But you have more questions about the Vanderbilt defense going into the weekend than maybe I thought they would initially. But Dylan, also worth noting, Alabama gets back Jay Miller is starting running back. I mean, that's a big deal as well. Big game this weekend for Vanderbilt, though. I'll leave it to you for some final thoughts before we get out of here. But we'll talk a lot throughout the week. We'll do the Thursday, or I guess you won't be on the Thursday show this week, but Graham and I'll probably do something Friday then, and we'll get going from there. But a big week for Vanderbilt football, Dylan.
Yeah, absolutely. And final thoughts is I would say if you're a Vanderbilt fan, like take a moment and appreciate this because it doesn't, happen every day that your team is undefeated and going to Alabama with a chance to make history again. And these moments don't pop up very often, I think, when you have teams like this and you have you know, players like this and a really fun storyline like this, a fun group, and a team that, has these things out in front of them that can happen. And as a fan, it's one of the most exciting things, and it's one of, if not the most exciting times to be a Vanderbilt, football fan. And we've talked a lot about this culture change, and maybe it's here to stay, and they're going to be like a stalwart. Like you can't think like that. Like it's very possible that this is the closest Vanderbilt football is going to get to a national title, like in the next century. So.
Hmm.
Um, Make sure, I would say appreciate this moment, appreciate the next few weeks because it could go awry, and even if it doesn't, like this is really just like a really exciting time. That's my final kind of big picture thought. In terms of Alabama game, I think you mentioned kind of Jam Miller in the run game. Linebacking core, we didn't talk about as much Vanderbilt's, but I think that's really important as well. And we're harping a lot on the defense, and I think that's because they've given us a lot more to talk to because the offense has been so good, and they're going to face more resistance. But I think the defense is really where this game is either won or lost. Whether they can go out there, Vanderbilt's defense could let up 40 points this week and still go out there and win the game. Like it's very
Yeah.
possible that that's the scenario. And I think that's kind of what we talked about this week. Like Vanderbilt let up 35, defense let up 35 points. And I wouldn't say they played a good game or they won that game or anything, but they didn't lose that game, even though they let up
Mhm.
35 points. I think the linebacker is really important. Bryce Cowan, I would not be surprised if we see more of him on the field. He's really athletic. Played a
Mhm.
lot. I think Clark Lee mentioned him in the presser without, being prompted. I think he has two forced fumbles this year. I thought Longwell and Patterson have been good. Neither of them have been game wreckers, I would say. Maybe Longwell's, I think he had a pretty good game this past week. Patterson, after the targeting hit, we haven't seen as much of him. He goes out there and
Mhm.
makes plays, but nobody's really, game wrecking from that linebacker core. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that Bryce Cowan, more Nick Rinaldi, because they're going to need someone to go out there and make a play at some point in this game. And obviously that, rides on the offense, but I think the ability for the defense to go out there and get that big play could be the difference maker, Joey.
Sure. Dylan, one final thing. I look at this game as one that could even catapult Vanderbilt into a new level
Yeah.
of notoriety, I guess. I mean, what are the odds they're a top 10 team if they win this game? I mean, I would guess pretty high at this point, which Vanderbilt has never been a top 10 team in program history. And
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think I put a tweet out about this because people were asking me, like, is there a chance the college game day could come to Nashville? And like my personal opinion, which is very unsourced, is that like if Vanderbilt beats Alabama and a couple other things go right, like there's a very real chance the college game day comes back to Vanderbilt either for the LSU game or maybe the Missouri game or maybe the Auburn game down the road.
mm,
This is a, game that to your point, Joey, can take them from like okay, we haven't taken this team seriously. They're really good. They're a contender to like this is one of the best teams in the country and like they're they should make the college football playoff and like if we're, Pat McAfee in college game day or we're the national media or we're just fans of college football, like Nashville becomes the place to be. Like Vanderbilt
mm.
is the game they want to watch, but I'll let you finish off your thoughts there before we wrap up.
Dylan, I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to say. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
All right, so I
Well,
cut you there.
no, you're
I
good. That
stole your
was
thunder.
you said it better than I would have. Here's the thing. If this was a normal Vanderbilt football season, then we would be talking about basketball's potential rotation and how we view that shaping out right now. And that would be our Monday podcast. That people would
I'd
want
be
to hear.
I'd be talking about baseball, you'd be talking about basketball, and no one
Yeah,
would be talking about football. You're right.
I mean, we would be talking about Mike James's potential breakout season now that he's not under Kenny Payne and the dumpster fire that was Louisville. I mean, we're talking about Vanderbilt football, and we're going in depth on the matchup at this point of the season, which I mean that people haven't been interested in that in the past because of what this program had become. I mean, Dylan, this is the golden age, like we mentioned, and this might be the highest point that we get to in terms of buzz and just national headlines. I mean, enjoy it while you can. But again, like if they win this weekend, you could see it blow up into a completely different level as well. So be sure to check out the site, Vandy on SI. Check us out on Twitter, Dylan Tovitz, Joey Dwyer. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. We'll talk soon. Peace.